The UK Chancellor Rachel Reeves has just delivered her autumn statement, raising a whopping £40 billion. You may remember the promise that they were not to increase taxes for working people, specifically speaking to income taxes, VAT, as well as national insurance. However, 25 billion of the £40 billion in tax hikes that they announced today actually will be coming from employers' NIC going up. In addition to that, there have been other tax increases announced today, which I'm going to be unpacking in a lot of detail. Capital gains tax has increased. Inheritance taxes have gone up. Specifically, pensions are now to be taxed when it comes to inheritance. In addition to that, VAT on private school fees, as well as other aspects of taxes that I'm going to be covering and just unpacking on today's video. There were other announcements made, of course, relating to investments to be made in the UK across the NHS, across education, and across various other parts with the goal of boosting economic growth in the UK. However, the data from the Office for Budget Responsibility actually shows that the GDP for the UK does increase for the next year or two, but then it actually declines or remains broadly flat, lower than what had been forecasted previously when the previous government were in place. So I'd like you guys to actually be the ones who decide, with the new taxes, firstly, with the new taxes that have been introduced, did they really stick to their promise of no additional taxes for working people? If they did, please jump in the comments and let me know. But if you think they lied, actually jump in the comments and let me know if you think they lied about that promise. And then secondly, I want you to then be the judge based on what's been shared. Whether you think this was a good budget on balance, or whether you just feel like, do you know what? It's the same business as usual, and as expected, more taxes have been levied on us as workers, or as business owners, or as people who've been diligently saving and investing for the future. For those who are new to our channel, my name is Ken Okorafor. I'm one half of the Humble Penny and Financial Joy Academy. I'm a chartered accountant, a former CFO, and a Sunday Times bestselling author of our debut book titled Financial Joy. If you're new to our channel, please feel free to check out our previous videos. And if you're enjoying this video, do please hit the like button, because that gives me a signal. All right, just jump in, and please be patient with me. I'm going to just go through line by line to just make sure I'm delivering the actual facts. So firstly, it was a historic moment to see Rachel Reeves actually delivering the budget as the first ever female chancellor in the UK. And that should be celebrated. That was absolutely incredible to see that happening. And then she went on to begin that budget. And she said that her goal is actually to put more pounds into people's pockets. Naturally, this is what we'd expect her to say as a chancellor. Okay, and then she started talking about the economic outlook. So on inflation, she said that the OBR the Office for Budget Responsibility said that CPI inflation will average 2.5% this year in 2024, 2.6% in 2025, and then 2.3% in 26, 2.1% in 27, 2.1% again in 28, and 2% in 2029. Okay, so inflation increasing a little bit, but then remaining, according to these forecasts, almost flat pretty much over the forecast period. Then she went in to talk about economic growth prospects. Bear in mind that she says the OBR had published a detailed assessment of Labour's policies for the next decade. And this is where it gets really interesting when you look at GDP. Bear in mind the big messaging from the Chancellor and the current government is about invest. And of course, with the idea of investment being that, we would expect the UK to finally get back onto that growth trajectory. However, here is what the forecast looks like when it comes to real GDP growth over the next 5 years. It says here that for 2024, we are expecting GDP growth of 1.1%. In 2025, we're expecting it to be 2%. Then it's meant to be 1.8% for 2026, 1.5% for 2027, 1.5% again for 28, and 1.6% for 2029. Rachel Reeves herself said that this budget will permanently increase the supply capacity of the economy, boosting long-term growth. I don't know about you, but those numbers don't really speak to long-term growth to me by the looks of it. In fact, it's actually quite a change from what the OBR had predicted under the previous government. What we're seeing effectively is that there's an expectation there'll be faster growth in the next couple of years, so 2024, 2025. However, the UK economy is not expected to expand as quickly in the remaining period of the forecast period, being 2026 to the year 2028. So bear that in mind as you reflect on the budget overall, because if you think about it, a big piece in all of this is really getting the UK economy stable and growing and all of that. And if the OBR are saying that, the forecasts aren't really looking that promising, yes, we have a little bit of growth, but it's not really looking that promising, then it does make me question, some of the points that have been made today. The Chancellor then went on to talk about the importance of certain guardrails that she's put in place. Specifically, she introduced what she called the stability rule, which I thought was a really, really good thing to have in place. The stability rule, she says, means that they will bring the current budget into balance so that they don't borrow to fund day-to-day spending. Okay. She said she will also work on reducing wasteful spending and has set a 2% productivity savings target for various government departments, which will come as really good news, because one of the big arguments we always have is it's not just about raising money, it's about how that money is being used efficiently to deliver the outcomes for public services and so on. The Chancellor then went on to talk about various cost of living supports that she announced. The first being the national minimum wage. So the national minimum wage for people aged 21 and older will now rise by 6.7% from £11.44 an hour to £12.21 from next April. Okay. Now, and there were other things that were announced related to apprentices and, and that sort of thing. Also worth mentioning that in addition, the national minimum wage will also rise for people aged between 18 and 20 from £8.60 to £10. Now, whilst this is good news, and the rise in the national living wage and minimum wage increases, it's obviously good news for people, but it's also worth mentioning and also worth thinking about it from the other perspective. I mentioned earlier that 25 billion of the 40 billion tax rise that got announced was coming from businesses. So you always have to think, well, actually, if they promise no additional taxes for working people, but they're hiking up the cost for businesses, raising minimum cost of wages, raising employers and obviously businesses a lot of them, mostly small businesses, are already struggling enough as it is. You have to think then the real implication of that is that there will be an impact on jobs. And this is well documented. Even the Chancellor herself has previously talked about the fact that, NI has this impact on jobs, right? It will not only affect potential jobs for the future, it will also affect people's potential for pay rises and that sort of thing. So if you think about it, although what I've been hearing a lot, because I listened to every single moment of the entire budget, a lot of the wording that was being used was that, working people will not see an increase on their pay slip. So you get your pay slip, you look at it, there'll be no increase. We're not stupid people. We know that obviously, these rises are going to come indirectly, which is really what's going to be happening and unfolding over the next few years as a result of these various announcements. The second thing that was announced as far as cost of living is concerned, in terms of support, was related to the carers allowance. So on the carers allowance, the Chancellor said that there will be an increase from £81.90 per week to the equivalent of 16 hours at a national living wage per week. So a carer can now earn over £10,000 a year while receiving the allowance, and this will allow them to keep more money in their pockets, according to Rachel Reeves. On the state pension triple lock, she talked about the fact that spending on the state pension is projected to rise by 4.1%, which obviously is good news for the people who receive the state pension. Now, related to public services, they have to raise money from different places to fund that, and this is where taxes come into play. So the first area of tax is fuel duty. So Rachel Reeves announced that she's decided not to increase fuel duty next year. She has decided to freeze fuel duty, so people will not experience higher taxes at the petrol pump. But notice this, I always think about the psychology of how these various bits of news are being released, right? So you think about, she started talking about, the economy and investments, and then she's talked about cost of living support, and then she's left the taxes until almost the middle bit or nearer the end. So now we're going to talk about taxes, how we're going to fund all of this, right? So national insurance is the big piece, right? So we know that the last government, there was around a 4p cut to employees' NI. She could have, if she wanted to, she could have reversed out, those cuts that were made previously, but that was like a political thing, and she didn't do that. However, what she has decided to do, and this is again, this is quite a big shock. She's decided to increase employers' NI from 13.8% to 15%. Right, and in addition to that, the threshold for which businesses start to pay national insurance on their workers' earnings is also now being reduced from £9,100 to £5,000. Just think about that. This is a massive shock for businesses, right? And this is an inescapable cost for businesses. And Rachel Reeves actually says, she says, quote unquote, "I know that this is a difficult choice. I do not take this decision lightly." Okay. So you can see the pattern of what's going on here really is that, when they were going into the election process, they said, yeah, all our manifestos fully costed, all this stuff. But if you really think about what's happening now is this burden's now being passed on to, firstly, to business people, so small business owners, large business owners, medium-sized, any business owner. Effectively, there's more taxes for you to pay, present as well as in the future. And as you come to see, that burden would also then get passed to diligent savers and investors, or people who've been building up their pensions and maybe planning to pass it on for retirement. I'll be coming to that very shortly, okay? Or people who own assets more generally, and buy-to-let investors and that sort of thing. We'll be coming to that very shortly as well. Now, the Chancellor also announced that the employment allowance, which is interesting because she's like, on one hand, she's like, I'm taxing you more as a business owner. But then she's like, well, actually, I'm going to increase the employment allowance from £5,000 to £10,500, effectively sending a bit of a mixed message to business owners out there. But she did go on to say that it will mean that 865,000 employers won't have to pay any national insurance at all next year. Okay, so she single-handedly pointed out next year. So we'll see what that actually ends up being for business owners long term. Okay, now let's speak to capital gains tax. The big news with capital gains tax is that the capital gains is tax paid on assets, and the rate differs depending on the type of asset that you are selling. So for property, it's one set of rates. For shares and so on, things outside of an ISA, it's a different set of rates. So for basic rate taxpayers, that rate used to be 10%. But today's announcement means that if you own shares, for example, in a general investing account and that sort of thing, and you go on and sell those shares, the new rate is going to be 18%. Okay, and for higher rates and additional rate taxpayers, there'll be an increase from 20% to 24%. Okay, but they are going to be maintaining the rates on property. Now, just looking at inheritance tax, real quick. This one really came as a bit of a shock in a way. We knew that there were going to be some changes when it came to inheritance tax, but there were two things that were announced. The first being that the thresholds for the current nil rate band of £325,000, which were frozen by the previous government, those thresholds have been extended by 2 years beyond the 2028 year when they were meant to be unfrozen. So that £325,000 nil rate band, that threshold will remain extended now up until the year 2030. Okay. Now, they've also done something, and it's interesting, they called it a loophole. They're closing the loophole by bringing inherited pensions into inheritance taxes. Yeah. So this means that basically, if you've been saving in your pension, and a lot of wealthy people actually, and non-wealthy people who have pensions, who hope to pass on their pensions to their loved ones via an inheritance, a lot of people have been spending other forms of retirement savings and leaving their pensions mainly to pass on. But with this rule now, this rule change, it means that people now need to go and rethink their inheritance tax planning, rethink their retirement planning, and this will create a bit of a chaos actually for people because their pensions will now become subject to inheritance tax. It will form a part of your estate effectively. It could lead more people as a result of this news to consider gifting more money to loved ones whilst they are still alive. For example, they might gift some of their pensions so that their loved ones might get on the property ladder, for example. People are also more likely to begin to spend down their pensions during their lifetimes rather than kind of leaving them untouched. In addition, it might actually lead, almost create more interest in annuities, because if you can buy an annuity, you're buying effectively a guaranteed income stream for the future, whilst also trying to keep your estate almost within the threshold for the tax-free threshold for inheritance tax purposes. Okay, now moving on to the non-dom tax regime. So this regime is now fully abolished, according to the Chancellor, and she's going to remove what she's called the outdated concept of domicile from the tax system from April 2025. Okay, and they're going to be introducing a new residence-based scheme with internationally competitive arrangements for those who are coming to the UK on a temporary basis. Okay. The next bit that they announced today was on capital gains tax on carried interest. So this speaks to the private equity industry and so on. Rachel Reeves says she will increase the capital gains tax rate on carried interest to 32% from April 2025, and will be delivering on various reforms in this regard. Next was then VAT on private school fees. Obviously, this has been in the works for a very long time. Today, she further confirmed that from January 2025, there will be VAT levied on private school fees, which should come as a massive shock to anybody who is paying for private school fees at the moment, because it's coming straight after Christmas, a time when most people feel like, they probably don't have a lot of money left over as far as disposable income might be, but then, you probably end up then with a bill landing at your door from your school. So a lot of people are speaking to their schools, for those who are affected by this, to see what the school policy might be and whether it's going to be phased in gradually, potentially at schools. Every school is very different, so speak to your school if you are affected by this. Now, this next one was a real shock. I personally didn't see this one coming, but it's going to affect a lot of people who, are investors in property, who might invest in buy-to-let property, or who own a second home and that sort of thing. Rachel Reeves announced that the government will increase the stamp duty land surcharge for second homes by 2%. From 3%, they'll add another 2% to that, making that a total of 5%. And this is effective from tomorrow. This was like a real sneaky one, this one. Literally effective from tomorrow. You suddenly be paying 5% in total. There was some good news related to income tax thresholds, which was that you know how the previous government had effectively introduced these stealth taxes and frozen these allowances from 2022, I believe, all the way to 2028. Well, the good news is that Rachel Reeves announced that there will be no extension to the period of those frozen allowances and thresholds. So she said, starting in the year 2028, tax year 2028-2029, those should be expected to be unfrozen and starting to increase as people increase by inflation and what have you. Now, when it came to investments, she introduced what she called her investment rule, adding that she will ensure that the investments she announces and makes, will deliver a return for taxpayers. Okay, she says that the government plans to install specific guardrails to make sure that spending is wise. Okay, she talked about the idea that the government will capitalize on the National Wealth Fund to invest in industries for the future. Yeah, so building on top of this, she talked about the importance of driving a modern industrial strategy and set out certain sectors with the biggest growth potential. To which she then announced that confirming today that £1 billion would be invested into the aerospace sector, £2 billion into the automotive sector, and £520 million for the new life sciences innovative manufacturing fund. So you can see money also being deployed into various areas, to make sure that she's delivering on the promises that she's made about growth and the UK economy, which is very positive. Now, on housing, the government is set to invest £5 billion to deliver on their housing plan. She said that this budget will increase the Affordable Homes Programme to £3.1 billion and provide £3 billion worth of support and guarantees to increase the supply of homes and support small house builders as well. She also promised to provide investments to renovate sites across the country, including at the Liverpool Central Docks, to deliver 2,000 new homes in that area. The government's also set to invest £100 billion in capital spending over the next 5 years. The OBR say that this will increase GDP by 1.4% in the long term as a result of these investments that are being made. Rachel Reeves also talks about new funding for schools. Specifically, she promised an additional £6.7 billion for the Department for Education next year, 19%, being a 19% real terms increase on this year. This includes over £1.4 billion to rebuild 500 schools that she described as being in the greatest need. She adds the government will provide around £2.1 billion more to improve schools' maintenance, which is an increase of £300 million on this year. Now, the NHS is obviously a huge area for a lot of people. It's one that everybody talks about all the time. It was really encouraging to see Rachel Reeves say that there'll be a 10-year plan to address the health system in the spring. The NHS will receive some new funding under this budget. She announced £22.6 billion increase in the day-to-day health budget and a £31 billion increase in the capital budget, which she says is the largest increase in spending outside of COVID since 2010. Apparently, as we expect, and we're still waiting to see this actually happen, apparently this will bring down waiting lists and increase capacity for procedures within the NHS. Overall, just zooming out there's obviously a bunch of other things that were announced, but I wanted to just focus on the ones that affected people's personal finances directly, as well as ones that actually balanced, almost gave a balanced argument beyond just looking at how it will hit our pockets. How else could we potentially benefit from the big macro decisions that have been made today, both economically and so on. So I hope that's giving you a bit of a picture of what was announced today. But just zooming out of all this, I actually want to just summarize, just thinking about it, trying to be as balanced as I can be. Thinking about it, if I was just, analyzing this personally and just, thinking about this very objectively, I'd personally say, and it'd be interesting to know what you think, I'd personally say that it appears that, it appears that they've done their best to try to stick to the promises they made, but we've always known, and I made a couple of videos about this, right? From when, we were doing the elections to a video I made about a month ago about expected tax rises. We've always known there'll be more tax rises coming. I just feel that, it would have been more helpful for the country if they didn't really go on about this whole idea of not increasing taxes for working people. Because everyone's working. I mean, how do you define a working person? If somebody's working hard and saving and suddenly buys a house or has an investment property and maybe earning an income from it, are you saying they're not a working person? Or somebody who's gone and started a small business, or a couple who started a business, or somebody who is trying to grow their business, are you trying to say because they're earning dividends or they're earning a different kind of income, or because they are not an employee, that they are not a working person? I just feel that all this stuff, all this palaver around trying to, we have fully costed manifestos and all this stuff, which was good politically for them, trying to win an election, hasn't been very good actually, because, it almost feels as though they say one thing, to try and get into power, and then on the other hand, they go on to then do other things, which, if we're calling a spade, they have increased taxes, even though they've said we're not raising taxes, income tax, VAT, NI. We have seen NI rises, which will indirectly affect us. We've seen capital gains tax rises. We've seen pensions now being taxed as part of inheritance tax. We've seen rises in stamp duty. There are a bunch of other things. We've seen things effectively that mean that over time, people who've been diligently saving, investing, putting money into their pensions, investing in other assets, and now going to be faced with more taxes for the future. And those people are working people, whether we like it or not. People have had to work and continue to work to earn a living, to prepare for today as well as prepare for the future. So it remains to be seen whether the decisions of today will actually lead to the outcomes that are expected, being that we have a more stable economy, a growing economy, and so on. But what has surprised me though is the forecast by the OBR that the GDP for the UK will increase for the next 1 or 2 years, but then ends up tailing off and almost declining or going a bit flat over the remainder of the forecast period. That for me kind of just makes me think, well, I wonder if we've pretty much got more of the same, really, even though we've been promised change. Do we really have change? I don't know. What do you think? Please jump in the comments and let me know. Thank you guys so much for watching today's video. And as always, in all things, be thankful and seek joy. Take care and bye for now.